Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Clemens. I'm editor of The Hill in Washington, D.C. And in truth and disclosure, I am good friends, old friends, with our special guest today, who I'm so pleased to be here. We have Stefan Cornelius, who's head of the Foreign Affairs Department of Süddeutsche Zeitung, one of the great newspapers, one of the great media sites in the world. And Stefan knows Washington, D.C. well. And for those of you who are in the Washington scene, he knows us well, but he also knows German politics better than almost anyone on the planet. I want to encourage our audience to know that you can pose questions. You can start now and write them in the chat section, and they will be brought to us because I'd like to involve as many of your thoughts and questions and ideas as possible. Stefan has written a really important book. Now, this book came out before what we've just seen in terms of the recent election. It was one of the first major books out on Angela Merkel, called Angela Merkel, the Chancellor and Her World. And in this, and we've now seen another book just come out. Richard Holbrooke's widow, Kati Martin, has just come out with a book called The Chancellor. Angela Merkel is a riveting personality. And I think a lot of people who knew her didn't know that she was going to seem as riveting as she has now become in the end. And Stefan Cornelius has known her intimately for a long time, covering the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, covering her work in a long time, and knowing her from way, way back at the very beginnings of her career. So Stefan, let me just first of all say, great to be with you. And as we discuss your book, and we discuss Angela Merkel, you know, let me just say it's a crowded marketplace out there of leaders who want to feel like they mattered and made a difference. What are the differentiating factors of Angela Merkel as you see them that are genuine and do stand out when you kind of look at other leaders on par in the world?
Well, yeah, hi Steve, and hi everyone. So very glad to see you and happy to be with you. I mean, it's a great time to talk German politics, and we shouldn't only look backward to Angela, but also look forward to what's coming next. And actually, the next chancellor just touched down in Washington this morning. It will be a fine meeting. Now, but what made Angela Merkel unique? I mean, we're all wondering, because she's so down to earth, she's so normal, she's so imposing, and we wonder why we're so attracted. Probably it's just that. It's just that she's so graceful, she's so predictable in a way, and reliable in a positive way. Quite some traits which we haven't seen that frequently with major leaders in recent time. Some really down to earth predictability and reliability. And then again, don't underestimate, being in the job for 16 years makes quite a huge impact. She's there. She's not going away. She has weathered all those crises. She's been a constant and steady hand, and that makes Germany a very predictable partner for so many allies, and quite actually a very stable factor in European politics. Just imagine how big the weight shifted over those 16 years within Europe, away from the Franco-German axis, away from Britain, which was a major power, a decisive factor in European politics, to the sole player, which is now Germany. I don't sort of brag with that. I don't think this is something we should be extremely proud about here in Germany, but it's a fact of European power politics right now. That power has shifted over all these years, and that is mostly thanks to Angela Merkel.
But you know, one of the things that I think interesting, and I should have mentioned that, you know, today our audience and this program is hosted and organized by the Association of Former Members of Congress, and so these folks know politics and they know elections. I'd like to just reflect in this moment beyond Angela Merkel, whatever. So Merkel's punctuation point at the end was a recent election in which the CDU, I won't say went down the drain, but receded very quickly. I mean, we can call it the receding election. Is this a rejection of her? What was different about this recent election, and what stands out to you?
Well, power comes to an end at some point, and after 16 years, voters do sense that the country needs change, that the country needs some fresh faces. Actually, she has tracked out her time quite intensively. Angela Merkel wanted to step down 4 years earlier, 2017, when the last German election was held. She wasn't actually planning to run anymore. But in 2016, you remember, it was quite an important year. That was the year when Donald Trump was running for presidency, and in the end was finally elected. Barack Obama, who is a close intimate friend to Angela Merkel, was coming to Germany in November and advising her that in the light of what's happening internationally, with Brexit looming on the horizon, actually the decision of Brexit was made already, with unpredictable French elections coming up in 2017, he urged her, Angela Merkel, to run again. And she actually hesitatingly did that. She decided to give it another shot. But those last years of hers were rather unpleasant. If there wouldn't have been the pandemic, which is a story in itself, she wouldn't have really achieved a lot. This last term was marked by so many failures, by quarrels with her sister party, the CSU and Bavaria, and with a failure with a lack of sort of imagination for children. Much more on energy and environmental issues, much more reinvigorating, modernizing the country's digital crisis. Germany lagged behind in so many things, and voters say this is why they drove her party out and decided to try a new approach.
Again, I want to invite everyone to post questions. I'll see them on the right-hand side of your of the chat screen, on the right-hand side of your screen, and so we'll do that. Let me ask you a question about also the potential coalition partners in this unique moment. I remember with Chancellor Merkel when I met her pretty long ago, never knowing her like you did, but when Guido Westerwelle of the Free Democratic Party had become foreign minister. And so that was a time where, you know, as in German politics, as in many parliamentary democracies, coalition governments are possible. I'm just interested in how you see the FDP and the Greens right now as kingmakers. What does their likely inclusion in the next government? And I have to tell you, with all due respect to both parties, I never expected to see the FDP and the Greens hanging out in any equation. But I'm interested in your insights on that, and whether or not you think that is going to, you know, create a new and different shift in German politics that will succeed in the moment, or do you see trouble signs?
No, we have two parties, and you rightly call them kingmakers, who are not lagging that far behind. They are at 15, respectively 11%, and that doesn't sound a lot, but given the shrinking of the major camp parties, they haven't been impact. They haven't been in power for such a long time. Guido Westerwelle is out now for 8 years,
Right.
or Guido Westerwelle is dead, unfortunately. But his party hasn't been in power for such a long time. The Greens are even much more desperate to get in power. They haven't been in for 16 years. The interesting factor is they are worlds apart. The fact here, if you look at the voter group 18 to 29, the young ones, they, in the majority, voted both for Greens and the FDP. Each side got, let's say, 20%. Interesting fact, because both parties give us something to chew on, something to think about, something to polarize, something to renew. Either you go radical on the environment, or you go radical on liberal ideas. Liberal in the German sense, not in the American sense. Liberal in the sense that basically leadership wants to sort of forces give voters the freedom back. And these are some extremely opposing ideas of governing, which now have to be reconciled in coalition negotiations. That's the exciting part of this. We don't have these fights being dragged out in public. It's basically negotiated now in these coalition teams which try to form a government, and which have to compromise in advance to find a working governing program. But those two parties are really worlds apart. And so I'm very curious if it works out in the end. And if it does, it would bring in some extremely positive things, reinvigoration, some fresh energy, which the country definitely needs.
Did you have fun with her? I mean, you knew her well. Did you guys hang out?
Actually, you can hang out with her. You can too. She feels extremely comfortable if cameras are running. If she can sort of chat along without nobody taking notes or taping stuff. So she can be extremely sarcastic and ironic. She can poke fun out of stupid little things. She can imitate fellow politicians,
She can, wait, that's something she actually can imitate and mimic other politicians.
Sarkozy or the previous Pope were one of her prime targets. She has this kind of self-depreciating humor, which I like a lot. And she can be pretty sharp and witty. And so, yes, you can have fun with her, but actually you don't hang out with the Chancellor. I mean, that's not different to what you know from your president.
No, I'm just running over in my mind whether there's any chance of her appearing on Saturday Night Live, but we'll leave my fantasies aside for a moment. But when you ask it, part of the reason I asked that is we've seen reports of when President Bush massaged her shoulders. We've heard reports of when she first met Donald Trump. She remained very solidly and steadfast as he wrote a note to her and said, "You Germans owe America $2 trillion, but I can negotiate a deal," in which she didn't take that as a very funny moment. I don't know if I would either have done that. The relationship with Vladimir Putin, in which she was able to intervene and deal with Putin in ways that the US could not at a certain point before Donald Trump. I'm just interested in her as a person attached to the question of how she thought of and dealt with world leaders.
Well, she takes them as they come along. Sorry for the quality of my microphone. I think it was down a little bit. Probably it's getting better now.
It's much better now, yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Well, she has this very basic philosophy of dealing with world leaders. She says, I can't change who I talk to. I just have to. It's not in my power to influence sort of other countries' votes or decisions. So I take them as they come along. This is why she has this extremely conflicted and complex relationship with Vladimir Putin, who is a contemporary to her, who says her age, who basically never left her side. And they were really worst enemies here and nevertheless never ceased to talk to each other. So that's one of her prime rules: never stop talking, take them as they come. Admittingly, she had her troubles with Donald Trump. She poked fun of him when she had the opportunity. She enjoyed very much that she also had the opportunity at the G7, for example, Canada, to show him his limits, and to basically rally the rest against him. But in the end, she knows that political life will continue. And this is probably the simplest truth in democracies, that leaders come and go, but the system has to prevail, and we have to continue somehow. And this is why her basic philosophy is, well, you never win everything, but you shouldn't lose everything either. So let's try to find a continuum. Let's try to modestly march along and increase the level of predictability, of stability, whatever, inch by inch. You cannot really live off big deals all the time. You have to give and take. But in the end, we have to be sort of somewhere further to our own advantage. And this is something she really lived by day. And this is why it feels so hard to judge her work. There are a lot of critics out there who say, well, she never lived the big thing. She never had that fantastic idea. She never really pushed the EU to their limits. I wonder whether this is the right expectation of political work in the end. But that's a philosophical question in the end, and she decided.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I want to get to the questions soon that are coming in very quickly, but I want to hit that point for a second, because I've seen the criticism of her that she was reactive, not proactive, that she didn't engage in a big plan and didn't do that. But I have to tell you, I remember the refugee crisis. So as we saw Syrians and Iraqis and other displaced persons, in fact, the displaced persons crisis in the world continues to rage and continues to be a major challenge to nations, such to the point that some cynical countries, and I'll put on the table Belarus, are using the fears about refugees and migration and those have been displaced and weaponizing it against other countries. I was just in the Balkans and saw this happening with regards to Belarus and Lithuania. And it's a fear within the Balkans is we have a new tool of hybrid conflict, which is to find ways to continue to aggravate and erode trust in a government because of the injection and really the purposeful injection. Now she stood up, in my view, and I believe the number was 2 million, is that Germany is going to be home to 2 million refugees. Now I know that a lot of others were not there, but to me, I'm wondering whether when you get down to core principles about displaced people, human rights, civil justice, civic justice, whether in the moment of crisis, she is the one European leader that stood up like no one else and did that. Was that her defining, shining moment?
Well, but in some respect, yes, it was the most polarizing moment of her political life. It was the moment where she really turned Germany around and where she alienated so many voters. I mean, she made those decisions at the height of her power. She just rescued the euro, so the European currency, the euro. She just kept lead in the eurozone, and then came the refugees. But she never acted for from a pure humanitarian instinct, but much more from a complex pattern of arguments where humanitarianism, definitely was a reason, but probably the most driving issue was stability on the Balkans, was the question whether that can be weaponized in true sense, whether there would be war on the Balkans. And she knew for a fact that she couldn't turn back those huge numbers, 10,000 a day from the German borders. How should you do so? Flushing them back with a water cannon, shooting at them? You can't do that. And so she had to sort of find a middle way, accommodating them, and at the same time closing that passageway as quickly as possible by making a deal with Turkey, which she didn't like because Erdogan wasn't the guy you make deals with in that kind, give him money to hold back people. But that's what she did. So it was extremely pragmatic, it was humanitarian, it was a bit of all. And she was left alone from the other Europeans for some understandable reasons. The French president at that time didn't have much inclination to bring in thousands of more refugees because it would destabilize his own government. So it's a complex pattern, but yes, she at least maintained some kind of civility, and that was a big moment.
No, it's fascinating. I mean, my interest in her is sort of this was her big moment. Again, you said she stayed true to form. She may have found that big moment, but it wasn't that she had an aha. It was through pragmatic, deal making and whatnot. It took her down that course. Well, listen, let's get to the questions from our. Yeah, okay, that's. Yeah, I think that's a good bumper sticker for your program. Let me just go here. What were the key issues that resonated with the German voters this year? Are you concerned that the AfD is the main opposition party in 2 German states?
The first question, our main issue is climate. Interesting enough, because there was a big sort of public overwhelming debate after the flooding we had in summer, shocking experience. And there's some kind of German angst element coming in. The country was resonating with fear about these dramatically changes in our environmental system. We saw all those pictures of devastation, floods and fires from all over the world. So that is a huge urge for the public here to act on it. Concern on the AfD? Oh yes, I mean, look at the map now. Do you find the southeast of Germany, the former East German south, the Länder of Saxony and Saxony-Anhalt, Thuringia being strongly held now by the AfD. It's a different political landscape, and it should be frightening for one major reason. The other parties don't get a foot in there. They don't really have a chance to win those terrains back, and there doesn't seem to be a political exchange happening. So my concern is there's something taking roots which will take years and years to uproot and to change. And it is shielded from the rest of the Republic, one must say. The AfD is self-destructing in most other parts of Germany, but in that region, it is extremely strong.
Well, thank you for that. Let me get to the next question here. Would you say that Macron will be the new European leader, or are there other candidates out there to fill the void that her departure has created?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't underestimate Olaf Scholz, the previous finance minister, who most likely will become the next chancellor. He's a very shrewd negotiator, and he knows Europe extremely well. He's extremely close to Macron, and but not that close that he will hand over Europe to him. And there's another major reason why Macron will not be that kind of leader. He has alienated too many EU members, mostly in Eastern Europe, but also in the more frugal states and those who are much more fiscal conservative, the Dutch, the Danish, others, as such as that he would be able to take their to be trusted from them. The one leader I do see who carries a lot of weight is Mario Draghi in Italy, who runs an extremely and surprisingly stable government, and who still carries the mantle of the former governor of the European Central Bank, who rescued the euro. And so a lot of countries invest their shares in his influences.
It's interesting how a few years can turn around who's up and who's down in the European scene. The unstable countries before are now the leaders. And it raises this interesting question, Stefan. I was on earlier today with Martin Wolf, the famous columnist of the Financial Times, and he didn't say this today, but he did write a while back that the big problem with Angela Merkel in Germany, and then Schäuble, who I think was finance minister, is that Germany just didn't understand its hegemonic responsibilities in Europe. I'd be interested in your thoughts and reacting to Martin.
I would completely argue against this. I think the markets were very clear on what they wanted. They wanted blood, they wanted money, and they got that money from Greece and from Italy and from all those with those huge spreads. They couldn't finance their budgets anymore. They couldn't finance their debt anymore. And the only way to get out of that debt trap was to reduce the debt. And the classic way to reduce it is either you refinance or you get a new currency. You just write off some debt, but you can't do this in Europe. This is a continent with 16 countries having the same currency. You simply cannot sort of donate these huge sums to some countries who are not able to get their economies right. So the German way was, as Merkel would say, sort of unquestionable. I didn't see an alternative there. The market simply would have jumped to the next ship and would have sunk it, and that would have been Italy or probably even Spain or France. So the debt issue was overriding, and you cannot shower that with endless money and just hope that at one point it'll swim again. So I think the concept of budget discipline, of getting your house in order, getting your spending in order was the first right approach, and actually it worked. Look at Greece. I mean, the country is so good off.
Right. So let me ask another question, and I'm going to frame it in a way. I'm going to tell our former members of Congress I'm going to use a strong word for effect. I don't really mean it, but I'm going to use it for effect, which often politicians do. But Nord Stream 2 was for Donald Trump, President Trump, a measure of traitorousness. And it was a line that mattered. And the question is, what is the future of Nord Stream 2? What's the impact of the viability of Ukraine and its conflict with Russia in this? But I'd also like to just piggyback and ask, what were Angela Merkel's deep thoughts on Nord Stream 2? Was she a big cheerleader? Was it something she thought was structurally vital? And when Donald Trump said, basically, you're a traitor for supporting Nord Stream 2, how did that play?
Well, I hardly know any more complex issue than Nord Stream 2. And I just throw a couple of arguments now to you just to set the scene and just to frame it that this is a traitor thing. This is wrong. First of all, Germany and Russia, or Europe and Russia, have enjoyed extremely stable energy relations even during the Cold War. There was no question about the reliability in energy supply, and the continent depends on it. A third of energy comes from Russia. Second, it was constructed and designed as a pure market tool first, just to ease transport. And after the political implications were well overseen with the effect on Ukraine, there were mechanisms being put in place that reverse flow and supply guarantee for Ukraine would at least shield Ukraine from from direct Russian influence. Nevertheless, I agree it diminishes Ukrainians' standing versus Russia. And this is a security problem. And I, for that reason, am not a fan of Nord Stream 2. But I'm not just playing the devil's advocate and tell you what Merkel thinks. She was sort of torn between those arguments. But she was also torn in her coalition government with the SPD. And the SPD is a staunch defender of Nord Stream, mostly because the former Chancellor, Gerhard Schröder, who actually wrote an op-ed today defending Russian energy policy again, sits in the board of Nord Stream and of Rosneft, the Russian energy supplier. So she was actually asked whether she should drop Nord Stream and her coalition or carry on somehow, and she decided for the latter. And now things really, or tensions increase, and we do see that exactly today or the last days when the gas prices in Europe soar, and the Russians are simply not increasing supply. They're keeping us at the short leash for a simple reason. They're building up pressure. If you look at sort of the fringe countries now, take little Moldavia, for example, which has now just claimed today they're lacking a third of their energy demand. They run out of gas this winter. It'll be a very harsh winter for Moldavia. Look at Bulgaria, where they vote for the third time in November to find a stable government, which will definitely be an anti-Russian government. And the Russian ambassador in Sofia pressing the sitting government to renew the gas supply contract on long-term basis to guarantee Gazprom's influence. So yes, they are using the political leverage wherever they can. But then again, let's have a quick look short-term or sort of medium-term, 20 years ahead. We are talking of a Russia which to 20% of its GDP uses fossil energy, to 40% of its budget needs its fossil energy, and to 60% of its exports uses fossil energies. Now they're exporting those fossil energies to countries which are all committed to get out of that crap in 2050 at the latest. So we'll all be CO2 neutral by then. So what will Russia do then? It's just 20 years down the line. They'll sit there naked, no business at all. So Putin has a real problem. And that will really impact. And we should design our Russian policy in view of what Russia's problems will be. And they will be huge if we pursue our path to carbon neutrality.
Thank you. Another question from our former members of Congress audience. We are watching now the tendency of inflation all over the world, even in Germany, partly because of shortage of energy, which you just said, the surge in prices, et cetera. With that as background, will voters supporting the libertarian FDPs continue to support a traffic light coalition, which is, for our audience, the Social Democrats, the Free Democrats, and the Greens, if carbon tax and carbon border adjustment is adopted by the German government?
The tax issue is big for the FDP, I agree, and it'll be the biggest hurdle in those negotiations. I don't see that this is a sad deal. Tax increases can be camouflaged. In other words, you can use other means of mobilizing money than calling it taxing. But nevertheless, the carbon issue is something which is widely agreed upon in Germany. So my guess is we will find ways to price carbon and turn that to the voters and turn that to those who pay for it, the ordinary citizens. Whereas the FDP will hold high its demands on leave it to the market. This is sort of this contradiction I cannot reconcile now, which they will have to talk about in their negotiations. But the differences between the the state-driven economy ideas by the Greens, especially in respect of the energy sector and the climate sector, and the much more libertarian approach by the FDP, this is the big question to be resolved. But on the other side, they don't have another option. The CDU.
Can I ask you
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just ask you a quick little side question. It's just as a hypothetical, which sometimes is interesting, sometimes not. But the hypothetical for me was, if Angela Merkel were in the conditions where she was still in office and she had to have a traffic light coalition and she had to go to Glasgow with whatever they're going to do and begin looking at border adjustability and carbon taxes, as a political reality that she may not have wanted, but she had to deal with, how would Angela Merkel have done it, approached it?
I think she would have gone the same way. I think Merkel would have loved to have a deal with the Greens, to go in a coalition with them. She always had that this urgency to sort of approach the climate issue much stronger. She was an environmental minister in the 90s, and then she started in 2005. She started out as the climate chancellor. And that was soon forgotten when the financial crisis hit in 2008, and the euro crisis came, and the refugee crisis, and that crisis, and such crisis. So she never really managed to sort of live out her inner demands, which were clearly focused on the climate issue. So I think she wouldn't shy away from tax increases here. But then again, I think the interesting approach would be to to steer an economy-driven, a market-driven reform of the environmental sector, the energy sector, the German industrial sector by incentives. You simply have to give tax reductions for changing stuff. You have to bring this huge productive German manufacturing industry to turn the ship around with least cost possible, and that's probably what's going to happen. You basically tell the automotive industry, which is the key industry in all of this, that they will mostly be tax exempt if they do it on their own.
Right.
And if you look at the Chinese market, and I see the next question is on China, just give you sort of the short preview thing. I mean, BMW's growing market and Mercedes' growing market is China only. It's not the US, it's not Europe anymore. The average BMW driver in Germany is 56. The average BMW driver in China is 33.
Right. Well, this next question is just jump into China. It raises, the Greens' antipathy towards China on human rights. I'm going to piggyback and say the Greens have an antipathy about Poland within the EU and what's going to go on with their carbon future. There's an antipathy in the FDP about Viktor Orban and how Orban is running his world. So I'm interested in these sort of tensions, both about China out there, which is external, but internally, countries like Poland and Hungary, and how you think Germany will navigate that, or how the new government will navigate that.
Right. It's sort of as a disclaimer, I think we should really be aware that the China view in the US and in Europe / Germany is extremely different.
Yeah, I think so too.
I mean, I really, really deplore that there is such a lack of transatlantic exchange on China. It's one of the biggest strategic gaps we do have, and we need to fill, because we do see the country different lights. I have a lot of sympathy on the American view, the Washington view, and I do recognize that the German view is blended by this, or sort of distorted by the industrial lens which we do have. The German import-export figures with China are just flabbergasting, and you simply know that we cannot afford to lose that market. Having said that, China also is vulnerable. And what's happening in China right now, the kind of growth which is unlimited, which is so far pre-pandemic already, the kind of energy consumption have, it's all not lasting. It's all not sort of productive. It's just sort of mass-driven. And this is what China should be concerned about. So they need to adjust, and they need to have our markets as well. I think there are ways to approach it, but we can only do together. Now, how do the Greens see them and the FDP? Actually, you should be surprised. You will have tough China bashing coming from their sides. The Greens have a very, very mature foreign policy team in line, which has been sitting sort of in the ranks for the past years, but is extremely well into those issues. And they are very, well, you can call it morally driven, but in the end, they ask the right questions on human rights, on Taiwan, on neighborhood engagement, all the kind of bullying we do see. And so expect the Greens to be harsher on China than the CDU has been, and do expect the Liberals the same way. You know Alexander von Lambsdorff, who's the sort of foreign policy figurehead with the FDP, who might actually become the next foreign minister. He's tough and outspoken on China. So I wouldn't be concerned about that.
Yeah, it would be very interesting if Alex is that. It brings back old Washington days amongst us all. But let me ask you, there are two last questions, one from our audience and one from me. We'll have to do in the next 6 minutes. But what are the main challenges the next German chancellor will face domestically as you see them?
I think the biggest challenge is not on the agenda yet. It's the lack of growth, and it's the lack of supply. It's the real huge distortions we do already see coming in our economies. It's probably the lack of tax revenue. It's the lack of money. I think the time of endless money supply, I'm not sure whether it's coming to an end, but I do fear that it's not healthy the way we're doing it. We're overheating our economies right now. We are not satisfying demand. We have huge worker shortages here in Europe, especially in isolated countries like Britain. After Brexit, they run short about 1 million in their workforce. The same here in Germany. Without Eastern European workforces, this economy would run dry. So yes, there are simple economic issues adjusting our economies to this new age. We do see two major impacts. It's deglobalization, sort of isolating countries, China turning inwards, actually the US to some respect itself, others following. And then second issue, decarbonization, the big changes in climate issues. These will be the two driving forces driving our economies, driving politics. And it's not answered yet.
Well, and just finally, just a couple of minutes because we've got to end on time. But let me ask the narcissistic question from our viewpoint: is do you still like America? Do you still trust America in Germany? We just saw the French withdraw their ambassador. I know Philippe Etienne is back in Washington now, trying to consult with American officials on restoring trust because they felt, as the foreign minister said, stabbed in the back. We saw, Macron pushing for a more autonomous, scaffolded European defense. And I'm just interested in whether we've entered a new phase in the transatlantic relationship where Germany's over us and, we're shifting towards Asia anyway, so screw them, that kind of thing. Like, where are the dynamics of the German-US relationship as you see it going forward?
Well, in terms of weight and power, we shouldn't discuss this. It's pretty clear where America stands and where Europe stands. And Europe is still a continent of 26 countries being sort of glued together to some extent. You never really know how and why. But nevertheless, yes, the AUKUS thing really cost the United States in trust and in reliability. It could have been handled differently. I fully subscribe to the strategic thinking behind it. It's the right decision, but it shouldn't have done so much harm. The big issue will be transatlantically to deal with each other without driving each other apart. And that's what I do, I'm afraid to say, I do see quite more frequently from the US, the lack of consultation at the end of the Afghanistan adventure was one of those disappointing low points. But nevertheless, I just had a turn with the SACEUR and other high brass military representatives. This alliance is staunch. I don't need to be convinced about the importance of America. America is a European power, and it should actually want to be a European power. America's global influence is also is depending on the footprint it leaves all over the world, and it's so easy to have a footprint here in Europe. Europe needs the US, and the US needs Europe. And we should actually prepare for those times where those things are really threatened, and they might come in sooner rather than later.
Well, I'll tell our audience with Stefan Cornelius, you can really have a tour de force of world issues. There's a lot we didn't discuss. We didn't discuss Afghanistan. We haven't discussed as much as we might have in the Glasgow Accord coming up, but we discussed so many other things and had deep dives of them. And I'm very grateful to Stefan Cornelius of the Süddeutsche Zeitung for joining us, and buy his book, Angela Merkel, the Chancellor in the World, and take a look at it. We really appreciate your insights, Stefan. Thank you so much to all of those who posed questions and are with us today. And again, on behalf of the former members of Congress, we really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, Steve.
We'll see you soon. This is a topic that will come back. Take care. Thank you.